If you're unfamiliar with Australian rules football, well, it was invented in Melbourne in about 1858, not long after Melbourne itself had been established. It's kind of a combination of multiple sports. It's not too dissimilar to Gaelic football. It involves a lot of running, kicking, catching, tackling, and the occasional squirrel grip, which, if you're not aware, is just an unconventional way of tackling your opponent. With that being said, here are the 2021 AFL stadiums. The AFL is a little unusual in that 9 clubs, half the league, play out of just 2 stadiums. I understand why they do it, money, but I much prefer the idea of each club having their own stadium like they did in the old days. Anyway, let's get into it. Optus Stadium. Well, as somebody said, the West is the best. That is debatable, but what isn't debatable is that this stadium is spectacular. Because it just is. It's Australia's most expensive stadium ever. This venue replaced the very tired-looking Subiaco Oval in 2018, and has attracted huge crowds ever since. Although there was a huge drop-off last year, not sure why, hopefully that's short-lived. GMHBABCDEFG Stadium, or Cardinia Park as it's also known. I'm glad they didn't have to change their song to include the sponsor's name. Cardinia Park is the largest capacity stadium outside of Australia's state capitals. And that capacity doesn't go to waste. Geelong had an average attendance of 33,405 in 2019, which is the closest to capacity in the AFL. It's also the narrowest stadium in the league. Not particularly important, but just a bit of a fun fact. Metricon Stadium was fully redeveloped before the introduction of the brand new expansion team, the Gold Coast Suns. It looks great to be honest, but they probably didn't need to upgrade the capacity. The Gold Coast Suns attract the lowest average attendance at a little over 11,000. The stadium's best moment was probably hosting the 2018 Commonwealth Games. It had to be remodeled specifically for the Games. Adelaide Oval was once considered by many as the most picturesque cricket stadium in Australia. Back then, the capacity was a lot smaller and the AFL clubs were playing in the now demolished AAMI Stadium. Then the AFL moved in and the stadium was redeveloped. It was no longer the quaint little cricket stadium with a backdrop of St. Peter's Cathedral on one side and the city centre on the other side. But the redevelopment has been highly praised. It still has a classic look, partially due to the extensive use of bricks. They kept the old school scoreboard, they kept the Moreton Bay fig trees, and you can still catch a glimpse of the cathedral. So well done. The Gabba. It's got nothing to do with Yo Gabba Gabba, by the way. It gained that nickname due to the suburb of Brisbane in which it's located, Woolloongabba. It made history in 2020 when it hosted the grand final, the first time it was ever held outside of Melbourne. Personally, I'd like to see other cities host the grand final, even though the MCG is my local stadium. Maybe let the team that finishes the highest up the ladder host the final. The downside would obviously be a potential situation where Metricon Stadium hosts. Wait, what the hell am I talking about? That would mean the Suns would actually have to make the finals, let alone finish first. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should the grand final always be at the G? Speaking of the G, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Not many stadiums around the world have more on their CV than the MCG. It hosted the first ever Test cricket match, the Olympics in 1956, the Commonwealth Games in 2006, 2 Cricket World Cup finals, It has one of the highest aggregate yearly attendances in the world. It's considered the home of the AFL. It's the biggest stadium in the Southern Hemisphere. And up until recently, was the biggest cricket stadium in the world. Phew, that was a lot. The atmosphere here, even when there are 30,000 empty seats, is electric. Obviously, one downside is that it often looks empty even when there is a decent crowd in. And now on to the less accomplished but still impressive Sydney Cricket Ground. I love how the SCG has completely evolved over the years, but the ladies and members pavilion have stayed the same. The mix of old and new gives it a unique look. The SCG used to have the shortest field in the AFL, and the 50-metre arc used to overlap the centre square, which was a bit odd. That situation has since been sorted though. Marvel Stadium. Now, I'm not really into Marvel. For me, Captain Underpants will always be the greatest superhero, which, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the Justice League. So that's DC, isn't it? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. This venue is one of the most multi-purpose in Australia. The ground level seating can be converted from an oval into a rectangular configuration. It's the only stadium that permanently hosts AFL, A-League and BBL teams. The stadium is owned by the AFL and will shortly undergo a refurbishment. Giants Stadium. This boutique stadium was originally built to replace Sydney's old showground and to be the main baseball venue at the 2000 Olympics. It's currently the only stadium in the AFL that is named after the team that plays there. Giants Stadium could potentially be expanded to a capacity of 35,000 over the coming years. There's no rush though, because the Giants currently average around 12,000 per home game. And now the secondary stadiums. The grounds that the club might only play a handful of games at. I'll only give a brief rundown of each. University of Tasmania Stadium is a nice little stadium in Launceston. It's the only one of these secondary grounds that I've been to. Mars Stadium, interestingly, is sponsored by the Mars Tourism Board. Before the ground was redeveloped a few years ago, it basically just looked like a typical suburban ground, with one stand. TIO Stadium is the biggest stadium in the Northern Territory. That's not really a brag, but it's a decent ground. I like how one side has a grandstand and the other side is just trees. Blundstone Arena is probably the best secondary ground. It's more well known for being a cricket ground, having hosted innumerable international matches. It's in an incredible location, right next to the sea. Cazalis Stadium is located in what is Australia's tropicalist city. That's a word, right? It must be a bit of a shock for a Melbourne team to go from winter to a tropical dry season. TIO Traeger Park is located right in the heart of Australia. The stadium is nothing special, but it is certainly a unique setting. The University of New South Wales Canberra Oval. That's a mouthful. Located in Australia's bush capital, it has the unusual distinction of having hosted the only AFL game where it snowed during the match. That was in 2019. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.